Kai aku nui, kai aku rahi tēnā koutou katoa. E tikana kia rere ngā mihi, tuatahi ki ngā hunga mate tuatini o te wā. Hoki atu rā koutou ki te huinga o te kahurangi, oki ai. Ko rātou kia rātou, ko tātou te mahuetanga iho e noho nei tēnā tātou katoa. Ame mihi kātika ki taku ariki ki ngi tūheitia, ki tana whirinaki, o tira ki te kāhui ariki whānui, pai māri e ki a rātou katoa. Hai whakamutu i aku mihi, me mihi hoki ki a koutou ngā ringa, ngā waiwai o te kaupapa nei. Koutou mā, e kui mā e koro mā ngā māma, ngā pāpā, ngā whaia, ngā matua, koutou i whakapau kaha, ki te tiaki i te pāharakiki, ki te tiaki hoki i ngā tamariki. Pai atu ki a koutou i haere tāwhiti mai no tā wāhi Jamie mā. Tēnā noki koutou, ki a koutou hoki i ngā kaiwhakahaere o te Huinei, Leone, te tuakana, koutou o te Kotahi Institute, tēnā koutou katoa. Ai, Jenny, tēnei tū whakaiti kei mui e koutou tēnei wā, uri no Waikato, ko Waikato te awa, ko Waikato te iwi, ko taupiri te maunga, ko taniwha te mai, ko Ngāti Mahuta, te hapu. It's a real privilege to stand in front of you all today, feeling very nervous at this point with that big introduction, and I was thinking on the way down, it's a privilege to be involved in these sorts of hui, but when Leone asks you to do something, it's really nowhere to go, except to go there. And Leone was one of the supervisors of my thesis around Ako Pūrākau, and I was questioning why I was speaking in front of such a well-experienced audience today who have worked in this field much longer than I. And I'm tū whakaiti tēnei, kei muri a koutou. I also come, in my professional capacity and having worked and thought about Ako for 7 years during my doctoral thesis and Pūrākau, but I come as a mother. I come as a mother of 4 children, who had to get organised this morning. My mother took my 3 babies to one to Punareo, who's 4, the 6-year-old twins to school, and my big girl I'm sorting via phone because her boyfriend is in court tomorrow for a large charge. So we all have our whānau issues that we're dealing with, and I appreciate that all of us, as parents, as mothers, as aunties, sisters, come and make this space at this time. And I got through the Auckland traffic this morning, that was pretty big for me to get here. But we make this space to be thinking about this kaupapa, and I appreciate this time with you all. The other thing about Leone, especially when you have to follow her, she said everything, so I'm not sure what there is left to say, as well as tell the Pūrākau Leone. So Leone had asked me to talk about Ako and Pūrākau, and in my role as an academic at university, I usually start with things like what mainstream are doing and statistics and demographics, and I've been trying to be to do what Leone is saying, really practice what I talk about in Pūrākau, and I've been working on very closely with Joanne Archibald, who's been a real mentor. She's from the Stawell Nation at University of British Columbia, who is leading a lot of Indigenous storytelling and story work. And she always says she lets the stories come to her. So I was trying that last night. Not a lot comes quickly in my brain, unfortunately. But I thought instead of trying to talk about Ako and Pūrākau in quite sort of academic ways, I would try and just tell a couple of stories and think what that is telling us about Ako and Pūrākau. Because a number of you have heard me talk about Pūrākau before. And so these pūrākau, well, these stories aren't very crafted, and actually I was just reflecting on them in the weekend, because I think, you know, pūrākau are inherently pedagogical, and they've been demoted in the colonisation process and as myths and legends, and really created cultural disarray for us and how we understand our worlds. So, if pūrākau is pedagogical, then it's important that our pūrākau touch whom we want it to touch and are ensconced in context and purpose and deliberate. So I was reflecting on my weekend and the kaupapa today. And in the weekend we celebrated our 50th anniversary of our paukai at Taniwha Marae. So those of you know Taniwha at Te Kauwhata, just out of Te Kauwhata, about 15 minutes drive. There are 952 of us affiliated to our little Taniwha Marae. There's only about 3 of us who live out there anymore, but we all come from far and wide to our little marae, and it was a fabulous day. It was one of the first days. It was raining, sort of slightly raining, usually at our paukai, which is Waitangi weekend. The weekend that follows Waitangi, it's always very, very hot. So it was sort of overcast, and you know, the weather wasn't good Friday night, almost made you want to stay home. And then you thought of your uncle that would tell you off if you didn't get there to the 50th. So we were there early. Kawemate, for those of you who know, paukai started at 9 o'clock and the king comes on at 10. So I want to tell you about the rain, because usually you can sit anywhere at the marae because there's shade, but if it's raining, there's only that little tent. So we were all squashed in the tent. And I decided, fortunately, to take only one of my children, my youngest son, who really wanted to go, and he's 4 and cannot sit still for very long. And, you know, the pōwhiri at the paukai is however long as it is, and it was 3 hours on Saturday. So 3 hours is a long time for my baby to sit still. And I was really struck in that time, and this is in a story that is new or rocket science or anything, but I was struck by the way in which my baby was cared for. So he was jumping all over me and looking down my top and, you know, doing all those things that little babies do that are annoying, talking and laughing and farting and thinking it's hilarious. And I was trying to keep him quiet, and the nannies were turning around and saying, "Teddy." And he lasted as long as he could, and then one of the aunties next to me took him away to the shop, because it's a little shop, sells all the healthiest food. So he came back with lollipops, chips, a soft drink, and a big chocolate fish. And then he sat there for as long as he could. And then he started being hawhai, and another auntie took him away and came back with more. And so he quite got into this, but he was quiet for the entire time. And it wasn't just the aunties. In our relationships now with our whanaunga, who we don't see very often, I only see once a year at the paukai. But one of my whanaunga, whom I taught as a high school student at Auckland Girls Grammar, has a little boy the same age. And so she took him away as well, and they played. Anyway, I got home that night and my son loved the paukai. And I said, "What was your most favourite thing about the paukai, darling?" And he said, "The lollies." And I hope that when he grows up and reflects on paukai, that it won't be the lollies, because he will remember who gave him the lollies. And what the lollies really represented was this tiaki. You know, this constant looking and caring for. And these aunties weren't close aunties, whanaunga. Hoi anō ka titiro, ka kite te tamaiti, wāwahi tahana, nā kaharia. And it was a really good reminder for me, as someone who's busy, living urban, not in touch with those whanaunga very often, to go to a place in the middle of nowhere and see our whanaunga once a year, be there for the whole day, be present, be focused on our kaupapa, and yet be in that embracing context. Especially the woman, because we were at the front and it was all the way at the back. So I just want to, that's the first pūrākau, if you like, as a point of reflection for me, and a mother who is having her own challenges bringing up her children as a single mum in Auckland. The second was when we went into the whare nui, and I was saying to my son, reminding about his grandmothers on the wall and his aunties and uncles. And he stepped over the mattress and one of the kuia were making the beds and she told him off. Just, boy, get off the mattress. And we came out and on the way home he said, and I tell him off about mattresses all the time. We went and stayed in Tākaka at Christmas time in the marae for 7 days. And the kids were always jumping on the mattresses, and every 2 minutes we were telling them not to jump on the mattresses. Anyway, on the way home he said, "Mum, why aren't we allowed to jump on the mattresses?" And it was really the first time, even though he's known this for ages and we tell him off, that it was an in-context kuia, someone else telling him in a meaningful way that it touched him. And so even though I had been giving him those messages, it didn't mean anything to him until it happened at that point in time. So I want to reflect on those stories in terms of pūrākau and ako. And I want to talk about ako first, because ako, and just in a brief way really, and Leonie just asked me to talk about it to contextualise the way we think about the findings that are coming out of this research. Because ako is a framework that is bandied around by the ministry often as to teach and to learn, and it's often reduced to some pedagogical practices. To 1 to 10 and all good to go. And, pushing back from that is understanding ako as existing interdependently, as Leonie said, with all those other values that we know, that have to exist to enable ako to find meaning. Tuakana Peina doesn't exist outside whānau. Manaki doesn't exist outside whānau, hapu, iwi. That they have to have meaning in relationship to each other. So, understanding some of the kōrero that's coming back, there's a real tendency in a lot of our research to just say, there's the practice, go and do the practice. That's all you have to do, it's a behaviour. And if I think about particularly ako in education, things like the best evidence synthesis that came out from the Ministry of Education, began in 2003. They put out a whole series called the Best Evidence Syntheses, BES, and basically did these meta-analyses where they looked at all this research and they gathered the top, the best evidence, if you like, those things that were seen as rigorous, transparent and concise and evidence-based. Put them all together and you have the top 10 things that would be most reliable in whatever field. So there's a whole range of them. One of them is quality teaching for diverse students in schooling. There's one in ECE, there's one around professional development, there's one about teaching maths, there's a whole range of them. And one of the problems I have with the best evidence synthesis and this type of approach to finding solutions is it is not only reductionist, but there's no relationship between those things. There's no framework in which these things sit within. So you can we can say things like, one of the 10 evidence-based things for quality teaching is that you should be student-centred. And then one might be work collaboratively. And there's no principles or values that are holding those things together. And I think it's a good reminder for us, when we're pulling back from that stuff, to say, to come back to what Leonie's talking about, what is the framework? And as Linda said in that quote that Leonie used about kaupapa Māori, it's a way of framing, of structuring how we think about things, and that these things have to exist in relationship to each other. So it's not just the practice. The practice is underpinned by, as Leonie said, the philosophy. And when you get those two things right, and are they in relationship with each other, then I think we start to move on really understanding the concept of ako. So if I was to sum up in one sentence ako, I've written ako is a source of understanding about teaching and learning that comes from being Māori. And that's the hard part. Is the understanding being Māori. The process of ako was largely governed, in my view, by what knowledge was to be exchanged, for whose benefit the knowledge was to be transmitted, and between whom the exchange was to occur. So really just trying to bring together again the relationships between the knowledge, the behaviour, and the people for whom it was formed. So I don't really want to say much more about ako except that the things that I think are coming from the findings in the research sit within this framework that's just not reduced to a practice. Our tūpuna work did this, and therefore if we do that, we're all good. That there was a community, as I said, a whānau, and our challenge is to think about how we recreate those things, how we kawea te tikanga nei ki tēnei ao hurihuri. I just want to finish by talking very briefly about pūrākau. We only told the pūrākau, actually he gave the punchline away, of the pūrākau I was going to tell, so I'm not going to tell a pūrākau, except to just say pūrākau are powerful learning, teaching tools. And the work that I did in my doctoral thesis, the Fair Rising, was mainly a discussion with a friend of mine, ours, a colleague, Wirebu Doherty, and we talked about te pū o te rākau. How te pū o te rākau? Which part of the rākau is the pū? And if we understand ourselves as rākau, as we did and as we do, what does that tell us about storytelling or narratives? It's no coincidence that the word for storytelling is pūrākau. Te pū o te rākau, when I talked about it, was the part of the rākau that provides sustenance, the origin. It's the part that's going to nurture the tree to grow. It's going to enable the tree to flourish. It's going to enable that tree to look after the other trees, because none of the trees exist in isolation to each other. So if storytelling is te pū o te rākau, how do we understand storytelling today, our stories, as feeding us as Māori, as teaching and learning as Māori in our own whānau, in our own marae, hapu iwi? How do we rethink the stories, our accounts, the things that happen to us daily, as well as our traditional and our koro mehina, our stories, so that we bring them to life? That we not only tell our stories, but ultimately, as Leonie encourages us to do, but to live our stories. So, koina nā ki taku koro pēnei wā, a rei ngā mihi ki a koutou, tātou katoa, kia ora.